Hi, everyone. Welcome to our newest episode of RF Breakthrough, Implementing Climate Action in American Cities. I'm Rachel Isacoff from the Equity and Economic Opportunity Initiative at the Rockefeller Foundation. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We're in for what I'm sure will be a fantastic conversation. Earlier this month, RF grantee, the Boston University Initiative on Cities, released their latest Menino Survey of Mayors that unpacks mayors' current views on local climate action and the various tools they have at their disposal. You can find the results at surveyofmayors.com. Before we jump into conversation with our panel, I'd love to pass it over to Boston University's Associate Professor of Political Science, David Glick, to give us deeper insight on the report findings.
Thank you, Rachel. It's great to be here with you all today and to have a few minutes to talk about some of the results from the annual Menino Survey of Mayors, and in particular, the questions we asked about climate change and local climate action. I'm David Glick, an associate professor of political science at Boston University and a member of the Menino Survey of Mayors team. The Menino Survey of Mayors, this is our 9th year now doing the project. We have done it starting in 2014 when Mayor Tom Menino came to Boston University after he retired as mayor, and we've done it every summer since. This summer, as in many previous ones, we did it with our excellent partners at the Rockefeller Foundation. And while we have your attention, I will take a moment to preview more results we have coming out this spring from this same series of interviews with mayors we did last summer, results about things like poverty, cost of living, and automated traffic enforcement. We like to call the Menino Survey the only nationally representative sample of mayors. This is because we do a systematic sample of all cities over 75,000 residents. We reach out to all the mayors of all of those cities. This year, that yielded a sample of 118 mayors, and when we look at the demographics of the cities they lead, they correspond quite nicely to the broader set of cities. We speak to these mayors in person or over the phone, and all of the interviews, all the data were collected over the summer of 2022. So just in the next couple minutes, there's more in the report, and I certainly encourage you to look at it, but I'm just going to tell a brief story about what we see as a receptive and motivated group of climate allies, that's the mayors, but also a story that we think illustrates some real constraints and limits on sort of the choices they'll make and what they will do as political leaders in constrained conditions. So briefly, a few results about their basic beliefs about climate and local action. 9 of 10 mayors agree that climate change is real and caused by human activity, with some modest partisan gaps here, but also some sort of interesting findings among the Republican mayors compared to Republicans in the broader populace. Mayors also, almost across the board, feel a sense of urgency to act and feel threatened by at least one potential concern from climate change in their cities. Right, when we gave them a list of options of potential local impacts, only 3 said they were not concerned about any of them. Right, and as you can see from the map, we asked about things like drought and fires and air pollution. There's some interesting regional variation here that largely probably fits what you might expect. But again, the headline here is that only 3% said none of these potential impacts concern them at the local level, right? The other big headline on this slide is that 73% agree in what we posed as a trade-off question, that cities should be willing to make sacrifices and expend resources to fight climate change at the local level, right? So about 3/4. Now turning to policy. So we gave mayors a list, and you can see this slide shows the full list of local policy actions that are at least somewhat, perhaps entirely within their control, and we asked how much they support doing them at the local level. As you can see, first, there's just great variation, right? From 3/4 strongly supporting replacing municipal vehicles with more efficient versions, even before the natural lifespan is over, down to a very small percentage supporting things like restrictions on gas stoves in private homes. Right? We think the overall story here is that mayors are very eager to allocate public resources and to create private choices around climate action, but get much less comfortable and are much less enthusiastic and much more concerned about actions that would restrict residents' choices or sort of require substantial changes to the status quo. You see this in, making driving more expensive, for example. And as you can see down there at the bottom, right, even among Democrats, there's not a ton of support, or at least not a lot of strong support for some of the less popular options on this list. Finally, the last results I'm going to show you today, we not only asked about mayors' policy preferences, but we asked about their perceptions of the tools they have at their disposal. And we asked more specifically sort of what are the strongest two tools you have at the local level if you want to use them. And as you can see here, there's not a perfect correspondence. In fact, there's something of the opposite between the policies they're most enthusiastic about doing on the previous slide and the things they see as their most powerful potential tools, right? So influence over building codes and influence over zoning really stand out as their most powerful potential tools. These are not necessarily the ones they would use for things like electrifying their municipal fleet, right? And again, we think this is consistent with that story of constraint and limitation. And we think, a few of these quotes here hopefully will sort of help you get inside the mayor's heads on how they think about some of these trade-offs and challenges. Thank you again for giving us a few minutes. It's been great getting a chance to talk to you. We are genuinely eager to speak to you and answer additional questions you may have or just talk about these or any other results. So please do reach out. And we also certainly hope you'll find a few minutes to look at this broader report and some of our work from previous years at surveyofmayors.com. Thank you again. And with that, I will toss it back to Rachel and hopefully we have a great discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, David, for walking us through your findings. It's really helpful and important to understand not only how mayors are approaching this challenge, but also the tools that cities and the communities within them can use in the solutions, which is why I'm excited to dive deeper with our experts here on the panel. Joining me today is Mayor Justin Bibb, the 58th mayor of the city of Cleveland, RF grantee Nathaniel Smith, founder and CEO of the Partnership for Southern Equity, and RF grantee Katie Kienbaum, senior researcher with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance Energy Democracy Initiative. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
We just heard that mayors across the country feel a sense of urgency to act on climate, especially as their cities are on the front lines of the climate crisis, facing impacts like drought and flooding and extreme heat. And top of mind for everyone right now is the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act, the biggest climate bill in U.S. history, and how equitable implementation is really key to its success. So, Nathaniel, starting with you, how do we take advantage of the moment we're in to make sure that these unprecedented investments benefit cities and their residents?
Well, again, thank you for this opportunity to participate on this panel. I'm really excited about this conversation and looking forward to sharing. The first thing that I believe that we have to do is to make sure that we don't reinforce the inequities that we're hoping to not realize through the investments that are happening now across the country. Historically, unfortunately, we've seen many times where good money has created bad outcomes for communities because we have not been intentional about ensuring that those dollars are not only invested in the delivery systems that we need in order to realize the equitable outcomes we want to achieve, but on many occasions, the resources fall in the hands of individuals that are not necessarily committed to advancing equity. And so for us, the first thing we have to do is to work to ensure that the delivery systems, that the support systems, and that the relationships are in place that will ensure that the resources that are invested in communities will actually get to the individuals on the ground and not be positioned in a way where they may actually reinforce or accelerate the inequities that many of the communities are facing today. And I believe that it is important for us to do that on the front end.
Absolutely. Really important to center frontline communities in that implementation and make sure we're getting the dollars to flow to the right people. Along the same lines, Mayor Bibb, the IRA is unique in that it's designed to leverage billions of dollars of additional private investment through the use of tax credits and other financing incentives. At the Rockefeller Foundation, we funded heavily in the pro-worker tax space over the last 4 years, and we're hearing from our grantees that the tax system is critical to the implementation of the IRA, with 3/4 of the climate provisions running through the tax code. So can you help us understand how are cities and businesses and community partners working through this, and what support would you need from the tax field?
Yeah, well, I really want to chime in on what Nathaniel said earlier about the importance of equity and centering this work on our residents in cities all across the country, particularly in historically marginalized Black and Brown communities across America. this is going to be a burden we have to bear as mayors across this country. And it's one thing to create amazing legislation in DC. It's another thing to identify how to operationalize this legislation in our communities, in cities across the country. And so it's going to be important for us as mayors to work with our county leadership, our chambers of commerce, and the private sector to do a couple of things. Number one, translate what these tax credits means for our companies and our residents, but also truly build public-private partnerships to make sure that we're connecting these key stakeholders to these tax benefits. One thing we did in Cleveland after we saw an extension of the earned income tax credit and the implementation of the new child tax credit, we were knocking on doors, talking to residents, enrolling them in classes on the grounds so they understood how to enroll and how to get these benefits. And so we want to deploy the same kind of strategies as we seek to ensure that the benefits of the IRA are broad-based all across our respective communities.
Absolutely. Really identifying who those community partners are is going to be key. So, Katie, along that line, the implementation of the IRA will be really complex, and local partners will be central to making sure that they're responsible for many of the projects that the IRA ultimately funds. So, how can a community-driven process be leveraged?
Yeah, so as you already mentioned, a lot of the different funding programs for clean energy and the Inflation Reduction Act will be running through local community organizations and groups, but cities do still have a really big role to play in that process. I think, as Mayor Bibb already mentioned, one of those roles is as a communicator or a translator, making sure that their community partners understand the programs, know that they're available, know how to access them, especially in marginalized and under-resourced communities. It's going to be really important to make sure that they're aware of these opportunities and that they're actually able to access them. In addition to that, also along the lines of what Mayor Bibb already said, cities play this really important role as a convener of different groups and organizations and resources in the city. So they can take advantage of networks they already have, community input processes that they already use, and leverage that for these conversations about the Inflation Reduction Act as well. There's also a lot of really good opportunity for just creative ideas and creative solutions. For instance, in Rhode Island, they're looking for a community partner right now to help them with a Solar for All project that they're hoping will be able to leverage some of these additional tax incentives for solar investments, clean energy investments in low-income and disadvantaged communities. So there's also this opportunity for cities to think about how they can work together with community partners to find creative ways to take advantage of this funding for existing priorities.
Absolutely. And mentioning the flow of dollars specifically to disadvantaged communities, Nathaniel, you've worked a lot on the Justice 40 Accelerator. Can you speak a bit more about that and what we can learn from it that can be applied to preparing communities now for the IRA funding?
Well, thank you for asking that question. I think it goes back to the comments that I made before about the history of inequity and how it was and has been embedded in our public finance and investment strategies, how it has been embedded in our procurement and contracting infrastructure, whether it be locally or nationally, and really acknowledging that and understanding that, again, putting good money into bad systems will always realize, unfortunately, bad results. And for us, when we created the Justice 40 Accelerator, it was about, how can we begin to walk in lockstep with frontline communities and provide the level of support that is required for them to be successful in competing for the Justice 40 resources. And so for us, yes, it was about providing pre-development dollars for the various organizations that we're supporting around the country. Yes, it was about providing technical assistance and also hiring navigators that assisted each organization in navigating through the contracting and procurement processes of the federal government. And yes, it was about creating a space for those communities, organizations to learn from each other. All of those things were important, but I would say that the most important thing is that we lifted up a new way forward that really reflected a deep, deep belief that the Justice $40 can not only be utilized to reduce carbon or advance environmental strategies, they could be used to repair and heal communities that have been disinvested in for the past 40 or 50 years. And so, our first cohort of organizations, we had over 50 organizations. We now have over 100 organizations that we're supporting around the country. We worked with that initial 50. And so far, they've been able to draw down a little over $14 million in a short amount of time that they are now utilizing to repair and heal their communities through this executive order. And so how can we begin the process of creating complementary delivery systems that can collaborate with the federal government and work to ensure that when good policy is made and ratified, that equitable results will be realized because the people who should be positioned to benefit from it are given the TLC and the support that they need to ensure their adequate competitiveness as relates to these grant opportunities that are coming from the federal government. And I think the Inflation Reduction Act provides another opportunity for us to create a similar infrastructure that can be utilized to support communities that need our support, but we can also learn from through their wisdom and their experiences in working on the front lines.
Yeah, I love that. Really lifting up lived expertise and recognizing community's role in the solutions here. For anybody at home that's been working also on Justice 40 or have thoughts about the IRA, we'd love to hear from you. Please continue to add your thoughts into whatever platform you're using to watch this, and make sure to tag us with hashtag RF Breakthrough. Nathaniel, staying with you for a moment, we've been talking a lot about how we know that climate change disproportionately impacts our most vulnerable communities. Can you speak a little bit more about your thoughts to how we elevate the voices of impacted communities in climate action and make sure the communities closest to the problem are closest to the solution?
Well, I think, of course, this is where great foundations like the Rockefeller Foundation and even local governments can play a critical role in really helping to cultivate the agency of leaders on the front lines, not looking at them as communities that need to be saved, because no community needs to be saved, but that they are actual partners and co-creators of a new world, a world that is more inclusive and just. And so we have to put our money where our mouth is as it relates to creating opportunities for frontline organizations and leaders to be positioned to engage in an effective way for change. And until we really see their involvement, their genius as critical and central to our, the change that we want to see, it's going to be really difficult for us to move forward as a community. But again, it is not by happenstance, and I say this again, that the communities that are suffering, that are in disrepair, it is not by happenstance that they just popped up out of a cabbage patch. There were policy decisions that were made. There were disinvestment that occurred, other things that happened that really created these conditions that these great leaders are trying to, be resilient around and work through. And so by understanding the challenges that they're facing and really providing opportunities for them to strengthen their understanding of what the nature of the problems are, and even more so investing in the solutions that will come from them, I think that we have a real opportunity to move forward in ways that we could not move forward without their support and without their engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. We're hearing a lot about the role of community-based organizations, communities directly. Mayor Bibb, when Nathaniel's speaking about policy here, how can local government now take advantage of public engagement opportunities of the IRA? How do you make the connection for your residents that climate planning and policy impact their daily lives?
Yeah, I'm struck by Nathaniel's comments because for a long time, the climate change conversation wasn't a conversation we were having in certain parts of our communities. To be frank, it took me a while to be considered a climate mayor because for me, I thought it was a fancy things people talked about at a cocktail parties on the coast. Here in Cleveland, it wasn't a major priority. But when I think about where our city has come from, I mean, our mayor, the former mayor of Cleveland, Carl B. Stokes, the first Black mayor of a major American city, he led a pollution tour after a river caught on fire, which led to the Clean Water Act, which then led to the EPA. So our city has the roots of the climate justice movement. And so I spent a lot of my time talking about that origin story and what it means for us now. And so when you see the fact that in parts of my city, our tree canopy has been destroyed, in those parts of the city, that's where we have the highest rates of not only gun violence, but also asthma. That's a climate justice issue. When we have lead paint in our housing stock, which affects the ability of young people who grow up and having learning disabilities, that's a climate justice issue. And so I think not only lawmakers in Washington, but we as mayors, we have to do a better job of grounding good public policy in the lived experiences of the residents that we're serving every single day. And I think sometimes that conversation is missed in those sacred halls of Congress or in our foundations. And we need to make sure we're staying approximate to those people. I was at the Clinton Global Initiative conference a couple months ago. We were talking about this story of a grandmother in New York, who said that she didn't want to move to a brand new housing development for workforce and affordable housing because it had an electric stove, not a gas stove. And she was in charge of cooking the greens at our church every Sunday. And she thought that the greens wouldn't be as good on an electric stove than a gas stove. That's how our residents are thinking about it. And so we need to figure out, how do we solve for that challenge too, as we think about policymaking at the local level.
What a great story, and really lifts up that people don't live single issue lives, that climate justice is related to everything else that you as a mayor have on your platform, and needing to connect the dots for people to be engaged in this work. Katie, the Menino survey found that mayors from both parties strongly support purchasing new technologies like electric vehicles, but those are still very cost prohibitive for most families, and not everyone lives in a single family home or has charging access. Do you have thoughts about how programs like these can be leveraged to reduce inequities rather than exacerbate them?
So this issue really has two parts of it, the way I see it. There's this question of how we ensure that electric vehicle adoption is equitable and accessible. But then also there's this broader question of how we make sure that folks can get where they need to go and do it in a way that's clean, affordable, healthy. So on that first question, if we think about municipalities electrifying their fleets, that, even if it's not necessarily putting electric vehicles in the hands of community members, it does still have a broader community impact in terms of reducing air pollution, which causes things like asthma, right? It saves the city money because it reduces fuel costs. It also just makes the technology more visible and more real for folks. So school buses are a really good example of this. If you electrify a school bus, that means the kids that ride on that every day aren't going to be breathing in that harmful pollution. It means that these strapped school districts are going to have a little bit of extra cash. And parents and kids get to learn about what an electric bus is. In addition to that, beyond electrifying municipal fleets, there's also a role for cities to play in the deployment of charging networks and making sure that that is equitable. Another really cool example, I think, from I'm based here in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. The cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis worked with some community partners and the local electric utility to develop a car sharing program, an electric car sharing program that was really focused on trying to provide access in low-income and more disadvantaged communities across the two cities. So that's like another opportunity there for cities to kind of take this opportunity to go electric and make it a little bit more accessible for folks. But beyond that, we need to be thinking not just about electric vehicle policies, right, but also public transit, land use, zoning, affordable housing policies, all these other pieces of it that really make a difference. If we just get everyone who has a internal combustion car now an electric car, we haven't solved a lot of problems that need solving. So that's, we have to be thinking about maybe we can use some of these cost savings from switching municipal fleets to electric vehicles to help invest in these things like public transit, bike paths, affordable housing, all that other good stuff.
Yeah, which I think lifts up what you were saying earlier about just the need to connect community, hear what their priorities are, hear what their ideas are, and broaden the scope of what the policies lead to. My next question is for each of you. What are the near-term goals that we need to adopt to advance climate justice even past the IRA? What will progress look like to you? I'll start with Nathaniel.
Well, for me, there are a couple of things. One is that I hope that the resources will finally be used to repair and heal many of the communities that have been disinvested in and traumatized for decades as a result of bad investments and a culture of extreme extraction that has disproportionately affected Black communities and historically disinvested communities of color. And also, my hope is that, as we continue to transition towards a clean energy economy, that all people will be positioned to participate in it. As we talk about electrifying school buses, who will work to electrify those school buses? As we talk about, greening affordable housing or providing solar energy in communities or the creation of resilience hubs, who will be doing the work of helping us transition towards that economy? I say that it provides an opportunity for us to create an economy that works for everyone. Decarbonization does not necessarily necessitate racial justice. It does not automatically necessitate climate justice. We must be intentional and work together to ensure that all people have an opportunity to not only benefit from the perspective of their health and their communities from these investments, but they also have a chance to fully participate in the economy that we're transitioning towards.
Yeah, really well said. Katie, do you want to add to that?
Sure. I'll definitely echo what Nathaniel said in terms of, we need to make sure that all of the decisions that, cities, local governments, state, federal governments are making are incorporating climate and equity. It can't just be an add-on. It has to be really part of the entire process. In addition to that, at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, one thing we think is really important, especially in the near term, is making sure we put power over these kinds of decision-making processes back in the hands of communities and people and out of the power of large monopoly utilities that have historically done a lot of, caused a lot of this harm, this disproportionate harm on Black and Brown communities. So we think it's really important to do that because a lot of these different efforts to advance climate justice do threaten this 100-year-old business model that large private monopoly utilities have built up. And so we need to make sure that people have power in those situations, not the utilities, so they can't just block things that are beneficial for the climate and for communities like solar, rooftop solar, or community solar, but that aren't beneficial for the utilities' bottom line.
Yep, bringing back the power building aspect of all of this work too. Mayor Bibb, give you the last word here.
Yeah, as I think about the question, I reflect on FDR's New Deal and what that did for a lot of Americans, particularly white middle-class Americans, and how it ushered in the middle and upper middle class for majority part of our country. But many, working class Black and brown folks were left out of the benefits of the New Deal. But now you have a president, President Biden, with not only the Inflation Reduction Act, but with ARPA and the bipartisan infrastructure bill, with the new CHIPS bill. We have a brand new industrial policy, a brand new climate change policy, and the largest federal investment in American cities we'll probably ever see again, certainly in my lifetime. And we have to maximize this moment to ensure that the benefits of this legislation are not only broad-based, but targeted to those who've yet to achieve the American dream in this country. So we have to do a couple of things: elevate more voices around the table, not just when you're community organizing, but in decision-making power tables in this country. Number two, investments must be targeted and transformative to set up communities for a more prosperous future. And thirdly, we got to hold ourselves accountable. I need to hold myself accountable as mayor. My city council needs to be held accountable. Congress needs to be held accountable. And our federal delegations need to be held accountable to make sure that we get this moment right. And I think if we do, we'll see real change in this country, and we'll see real promise and opportunity for the next generation.
What a great vision. I just want to encourage again everybody that is at home participating. We'd love to hear from you. What are your goals around climate justice, or what questions do you have and want to add to the conversation? Again, make sure to tag hashtag RF Breakthrough. Well, it looks like we have time for about 2 audience questions here that we've received. So the first question is from Virginia. What are mayors and their teams doing to get input and solutions from constituents, specifically marginalized communities who are the most impacted by the effects of climate change? Mayor Bibb, do you want to start us off?
I guess I'll take that one. Well, just yesterday, we reconstituted our city's tree commission and kicked that work off to really focus on how are we going to restore our city's tree canopy for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And so we're getting input from residents and activists and key stakeholders to really guide our city on that mission. The other thing that we've done starting last year, is we kicked off the city's first ever decarbonization regional framework. And this is a conversation about how we decarbonize our city block by block, building by building. And so we're really focusing that conversation on resident voice, getting their input to really guide our policymaking agenda for the city in the future.
Great. Clearly not from a mayor's perspective necessarily, but a different way to answer this question, maybe around working with communities. Nathaniel or Katie, do you want to chime in here?
Well, I will just speak for the work that we've done in Atlanta through the development a few years ago of our climate action plan. We, along with our partners, Partnership for Southern Equity, were able to really work to ensure that equity was placed at the center of the city's climate action plan. We knew that as the work began to decarbonize, as new technologies began to enter into the community, we knew that potentially it would accelerate gentrification in many of those communities in the city of Atlanta. And so there are policies that are in place through that policy that is working to ensure that equity is at the center of the work. And one of the things that we did was a very active community engagement effort to ensure that the voices of community were actively involved in the shaping of that climate action plan. And, I'm very excited about our new mayor and his interest in implementing that plan and really working in an intersectional way between this conversation about climate and racial justice. So we're really excited about the implementation of that plan, or the continued implementation of that plan.
Really important. Katie, do you want to chime in?
I do. I have a couple examples, if that's okay.
Please. Of course.
I'll just share a couple examples that I find really exciting. In Providence, Rhode Island, when they were working on what became their climate justice plan, they really engaged in this very ground up process where they made sure community residents weren't just providing input, but they were really setting what the goals should be for the city and what the solutions should be. So I really recommend looking at that. I also wanted to point to Portland's Clean Energy Fund, which has members from the community that decide how those funds are spent in the city. So those are just like a couple of examples. And if you want any more details on either of them, my colleague John Farrell has actually done interviews with folks from both those places on our Local Energy Rules podcast that kind of dive more into how that worked out.
I like that Clean Energy Fund idea.
Yeah,
they did it. Oregon?
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes. Portland, Oregon. And they are funding that fund with a surcharge levied on big businesses in the city. So it's a pretty cool system all around.
Great. Well, Katie, I'll stick with you for the second question that we've received. So what are the feedback loops between local, state, and federal climate action? How can local efforts inform future federal legislation or administrative fixes?
Yeah, so one of the ways we really like to think about this a lot at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance is of cities being little laboratories of experimentation all across the country, really. So a city has the opportunity to innovate, to try and figure out what works, what doesn't work, how to make different things work in their local context. So there's this opportunity here to take all those learnings and share them with other communities across the country, but also higher levels of government like state and federal governments, and scaling up those learnings as well. It's just really important as part of that states aren't getting in the way of cities having those opportunities to innovate, and that they're enabling that kind of solution finding.
Great. Mayor Bibb, do you have thoughts on this question?
Well, I would just say that the Biden-Harris administration has really done a fantastic job engaging America's mayors on how to make sure we execute this legislation for our cities in the most prudent and effective way. This president, I think, has appointed 4 to 5 mayors to his cabinet. So that speaks a lot to President Biden's commitment to America's cities and America's mayors. I would also say making sure that we have a good working relationship with our state legislatures and our governors as mayors is a big part of this conversation, because some of these dollars will go through the state, not directly to cities. And so I've been working very closely with my governor, Governor DeWine, and members of the state legislature to ensure we have an all hands on deck approach and strategy to get these dollars to our states and our cities, and to make sure the solutions fit the unique needs of our respective communities.
Absolutely. Nathaniel, any final thoughts here?
Well, I would just say that, good policy always, from a political perspective, it's always good to have good examples of that policy being implemented, because if elected officials can't go back to their constituents and say, these are the successes that came from these investments, it's very, very difficult to get those communities a lot of times to continue to support the pathway that elected official is trying to push towards. And so, while we're happy and excited that we have the support of the Biden administration to advance climate justice through this new tranche of resources, it's up to us now to do all we can to make sure that we create good examples of how those dollars are touching everyday people in order for it could be lifted up to the mayors and to the federal government, so we can show the broader community that we're actually on to something, and it is going to be different this time. It's just as important for us to execute as it is for the elected officials to pass the policies.
Yeah. I think it's really important to lift up that every single person has a role in this, whether you're a mayor or working with communities or at the federal or state levels too, and even as an individual. So I just want to thank you all so much for your time and wisdom. It's been really informative and encouraging to know that you all are thinking about this in your day-to-day and may be that key that we need to unlock the funding and get it to the right communities. So I hope all of you tuning in will continue the conversation online using the hashtag RF Breakthrough, and have a great rest of your day. And I look forward to the work ahead.